So early on, if you remember correctly, we kind of found out.
Because I said, what about that Susie girl? I like her.
Somehow I found out and I looked her up on Facebook. You weren't quite as Facebook savvy as me.
I still am not.
And then I showed you a picture and you were like, oh, she's a beautiful girl.
What if the truth you thought you knew was only half the story? A newly uncovered letter from Joni Lamb's own son-in-law threatens to blow the lid off the entire Daystar scandal. It's not rumor, it's not speculation, it's written proof that could confirm a cover-up at the highest level. This isn't just a twist in the story, it's the revelation that could change everything for Daystar's future and everyone tied to it. For months, Joni Lamb stood firm in her public statements. She insisted there was no evidence to back the accusations against Pete and accused her own son, Jonathan, of spreading lies. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who believed the matter was settled. But then a letter surfaced. Not just any letter, a private, detailed account written by her own son-in-law, Jonathan Weiss, the husband of her daughter Rebecca. This wasn't gossip from outsiders or speculation from bloggers. This was family. This was someone inside the inner circle. And the contents of that letter changed everything.
For people to think, oh, well, he's taking advantage, or it's laughable, because we both are very strong, which thank God he's a strong man. I could not deal with the weak man. He's a strong man, but he's been nothing but a blessing to me. He has done more with me as far as time in the Word and personal prayer than even your dad did. He has done more with me as far as time in the Word and personal prayer than even your dad did.
The letter, reportedly sent to members of Daystar's board, directly challenged Joni's version of events. In it, JW described things he had personally seen, moments and actions involving Pete that made him deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't vague, it wasn't hearsay, it was an eyewitness account. According to those who have read it, JW detailed inappropriate physical behavior toward Jonathan and Susie's young daughter, behavior that, in his eyes, crossed clear boundaries. This was not the misunderstanding or innocent affection that Joni had described on television. The timing of the letter's emergence made it even more explosive. For years, the official line from Joni and Daystar had been that only Jonathan and Susie had concerns about Pete. They were painted as the lone dissenters, the ones with a personal grudge. But JW's words completely dismantled that narrative. If another member of the family had seen troubling behavior, then this was not just about two people being bitter or disloyal. It meant there were more witnesses, more voices that had been kept quiet. What made the letter even more unsettling was the fact that JW wasn't just a bystander. He was someone who had initially promised to stand with Jonathan and Susie if the matter ever went to court. That's why his sudden silence later on, and his refusal to give the letter to police, raised so many eyebrows. Why speak up in writing and then back away when it could make the biggest difference? People began to wonder if pressure had been applied, if family loyalty or the desire to protect the ministry had outweighed the urgency of protecting a child. Once news of the letter broke, it sent shockwaves through the community. Longtime supporters of Daystar began questioning what else might have been hidden. Critics pointed out that the letter's very existence proved that Joni's public statements weren't the whole truth. They argued that this was evidence, not speculation, that contradicted her. And if this had been kept out of public view for so long, what else had been locked away behind closed doors? What else had been locked away behind closed doors? The letter didn't just challenge a story. It exposed a crack in the foundation of trust. It made people realize that the official version of events was carefully shaped to protect certain people and certain images. For many, it was the first time they understood that this wasn't simply a family disagreement. It was a fight over truth, accountability, and the safety of a child. And once that kind of truth slips out, even in the form of a single letter, it can't be neatly tucked away again. The day the letter came to light marked a turning point. It was no longer just Jonathan and Susie's word against the ministries. Now there was another insider voice, someone who had been there, someone who had seen enough to write it all down. That alone changed the story forever. From the start, Joni Lamb's public defense of Pete followed a clear pattern. She insisted that the accusations came only from Jonathan and Susie, painting them as the lone voices of dissent, motivated by bitterness or misunderstanding. This framing made it easy to dismiss their claims. If just two people in the whole family had a problem, maybe it really was personal. Maybe the rest of the Lamb family saw no issue because there was nothing to see. That was the image presented to the public, a united family standing firmly behind Pete. But the truth, as it turns out, didn't fit so neatly into that picture. When Jonathan Weiss, Joni's own son-in-law, put his concerns into writing, it cracked that image wide open. His letter directly challenged the idea that Jonathan and Susie were the only ones speaking up. It revealed that he and his wife Rebecca, another of Joni's children, had also seen things that didn't sit right with them. This wasn't coming from outsiders or critics of the ministry. This was family. It meant the two lone voices narrative wasn't just an exaggeration, it was a deliberate distortion. And Jonathan Weiss wasn't vague about his observations. According to those who have seen the letter, he described specific moments when Pete's behavior toward Jonathan and Susie's young daughter crossed boundaries, hugging her in ways that felt inappropriate, kissing her in ways that made him uncomfortable. He didn't frame it as an accident or a misunderstanding. He called it out for what it was. Deeply troubling conduct. The fact that he was willing to put that in writing and send it to Daystar's board shows just how seriously he took it at the time. Other details have since emerged that add more weight to the idea that there were multiple voices of concern. People close to the situation have said that early on, Rebecca and JW openly told Jonathan and Susie they would support them if legal action was ever taken. At that point, their testimony lined up with what Jonathan and Susie had been saying all along. They weren't hesitant, they weren't downplaying it, they were ready to stand with them. That's why their later silence feels so unsettling. Somewhere along the way, that support faded. JW and Rebecca stopped speaking out, and when police asked for a copy of the letter, they refused to hand it over. From the outside, it looked like a complete reversal. The question is, why? Was it fear, pressure from the family, concern about what going public could mean for Daystar's image? No one outside the inner circle can say for certain. But the sudden shift left many wondering how much influence was exerted behind closed doors. The most important takeaway, though, is that this wasn't a story with just one set of witnesses. If Joni's own daughter and son-in-law saw behavior they considered concerning, then the accusations can't be brushed off as a personal grudge or a baseless smear. Multiple family members noticing the same kind of conduct changes the entire picture. It shows there was a pattern. Something visible enough that more than one person felt the need to speak up. And yet, despite this, the official family story has never changed. Publicly, Joni continues to say that only Jonathan and Susie ever had an issue with Pete. That statement doesn't hold up when you look at the testimonies that have surfaced. It's a version of events that requires ignoring what JW wrote, forgetting the conversations he and Rebecca reportedly had with Jonathan and Susie, and pretending there weren't other witnesses. For supporters of Daystar who trusted the Lamb family's public words, this revelation feels like a betrayal. If the leadership was willing to omit such key voices to keep their narrative clean, it raises questions about what else might have been omitted or reshaped. The fact that a testimony from inside the family contradicts the official story is more than just uncomfortable. It's damaging. It erodes the credibility of everyone who stood on stage or in front of a camera, assuring viewers there was nothing to see. Testimonies that don't fit the family story are inconvenient for those trying to control the message. They complicate the narrative, make it harder to convince people that the truth is simple and easy. But real life rarely works that way. The existence of JW's account, along with Rebecca's early expressions of concern, proves that the truth here is messy. It's layered. And no matter how much it's downplayed or ignored, those voices remain part of the record, whether the family wants them there or not. The longer this goes on, the clearer it becomes that the official version of events can't explain away every piece of evidence. It can't silence every witness. And in this case, the testimonies from inside the Lamb family are perhaps the most damning of all. Not because they come from enemies, but because they come from people who were supposed to be on the same side. From the very beginning, Daystar's official statements on the Pete allegations followed a script. They were clean, polished, and repeated the same message over and over. There was no evidence, no wrongdoing, and the accusations were nothing more than false attacks meant to harm the ministry. Joni Lamb herself echoed these points on her programs and in public appearances, speaking with absolute certainty. She framed the entire situation as a smear campaign orchestrated by her own son Jonathan and his wife Susie. The story was simple, too simple. Only two people were making these claims, and they were bitter, disgruntled, and wrong. That was the line. On paper, these official statements sounded reassuring. They were designed to leave no room for doubt. Daystar issued press releases saying Pete had fully cooperated with law enforcement, participated in every step of the investigation, and that there was no physical or testimonial evidence connecting him to any misconduct. They presented the temporary closure of the police case as proof of Pete's innocence, framing it almost like a divine victory. God had cleared his name, they implied, but the reality didn't line up with those words. The police themselves made it clear that the case was not closed because Pete had been exonerated, but because the young child involved was struggling to speak about what happened. The lead detective even stated directly that this did not clear Pete of suspicion. That's a very different picture from the one painted in Daystar's official statements. And then came the letter from Jonathan Weiss, Joni's own son-in-law. His written account described troubling behavior he personally witnessed. Pete hugging and kissing Jonathan and Susie's daughter in ways that were inappropriate. This was not hearsay or rumor. This was a first-hand account from someone inside the family. It directly contradicted Daystar's public claim that only Jonathan and Susie had ever expressed concerns about Pete. According to JW's letter, he and Rebecca had their own reasons to be alarmed. The existence of that letter alone shatters the clean narrative in the official statements. If 2 additional family members had concerns, then the public line about 2 lone accusers was false. It wasn't just Jonathan and Susie pushing this issue. It was at least 2 couples inside the Lamb family. The difference between what Daystar told the public and what family members were actually seeing behind closed doors is enormous. There's also the matter of how the ministry framed the pause in the investigation. Publicly, they treated it as the end of the matter, presenting it to viewers as proof that Pete had been vindicated. But privately, the truth was that the investigation was still open to being restarted, and in fact, it was reopened in 2025. That's not exoneration. It's a case on hold because of a child's trauma. It's the kind of detail that changes everything, but it was left out of the official messaging entirely. Even the way Daystar handled the family dynamics tells a story. In public, they projected unity. In reality, Jonathan was demoted, pushed to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and ultimately fired when he refused. The official explanation? Performance issues and insubordination. The actual circumstances? He refused to stay silent about what he believed was abuse. That's not a minor gap between PR and reality. That's a complete rewrite of events. What's striking is how carefully these official statements were crafted. They weren't just vague, they were precise enough to sound factual while leaving out the pieces that would complicate the picture. By sticking to a simple, repeated narrative, Daystar was able to maintain the loyalty of supporters who didn't dig deeper. But for those who saw the behind-the-scenes reality, the police statements, JW's letter, the private confrontations, the truth was far more complex and far less flattering. This is where the gap between official statements and reality becomes dangerous. It's not just about spin or PR. It's about whether the truth was deliberately withheld from the public. When a ministry presents itself as a moral authority but shapes its messaging to protect its image at the expense of transparency, it undermines the very trust it asks its audience to have. And in this case, the difference between the public story and the private reality isn't a small misunderstanding. It's the difference between a false accusation and a credible set of allegations backed by multiple family members. For supporters who believed the official line, finding out about the contradictions feels like a betrayal. For critics, it's confirmation of what they suspected all along, that the truth was being managed, not told. And for those in the middle, the ones who genuinely wanted to believe the best, the existence of documents like JW's letter forces a reckoning. It's no longer possible to take the ministry's words at face value without questioning what else might be missing. In the end, the official statements gave the public a clean, simple story. The reality was messy, uncomfortable, and filled with inconvenient truths. And as more evidence surfaces, it's becoming harder and harder for those 2 versions of events to exist side by side, without one collapsing entirely. Silence can be louder than words. In the Daystar scandal, silence has spoken volumes, not just from those accused, but from people who once seemed ready to stand for the truth. At the center of it all is the uncomfortable reality that influence, power, and reputation often shape what is said and what is left unsaid. And when those forces collide with the search for truth, the truth rarely wins without a fight. When the allegations against Pete first surfaced, there was shock, anger, and urgency among some members of the Lamb family. Jonathan and Susie Lamb say they found Pete alone in their young daughter's bedroom in a deeply inappropriate situation. They say they confronted Joni immediately. Early on, it seemed they weren't the only ones disturbed by Pete's behavior. Jonathan Weiss, Joni's own son-in-law, reportedly voiced concerns too. In private, there were moments when people close to the situation appeared to be on the same page. This was serious, it needed to be addressed, and they couldn't just look the other way. But over time, that solidarity began to fade. Conversations that had once been urgent became rare. People who had privately expressed their agreement started avoiding the topic altogether. JW's letter, an explosive first-hand account of troubling behavior, never made it into the hands of the police because JW and his attorney refused to give them a copy. That one decision changed the trajectory of the investigation. Without that letter as official evidence, it became easier for Daystar to maintain its public narrative. No proof, no case, no problem. And this is where influence comes into play. Daystar isn't just a family business. It's a billion-dollar Christian media empire with deep ties to church leaders, political figures, and donors. In that world, speaking out against the wrong person can cost you more than a relationship. Can cost you your career, your reputation, and your sense of belonging. Even if you believe something is wrong, the pressure to keep quiet can be overwhelming. The unspoken message is clear. Silence protects the institution, and in protecting the institution, you protect yourself. For Jonathan and Susie, choosing to break that silence came at a high cost. They lost positions, financial security, and relationships. They were accused of lying, of betraying the family, of trying to hurt the ministry. Meanwhile, those who stayed quiet avoided that fallout. They kept their seats at the table. They stayed in good standing. But the price of that silence is its own kind of burden. The knowledge that by not speaking, you may be allowing harm to continue unchecked. Influence also shapes how the public sees the story. Daystar's official statements were polished and persuasive, framing the accusations as baseless attacks. Supporters who trust the ministry saw no reason to doubt them. And because the voices of insiders, like JW, never made it into the official record, it became easier for that narrative to stand unchallenged. When only one side of the story is amplified, the other side begins to look like a fringe opinion, even when it's backed by credible accounts. But silence doesn't erase truth. It only delays its impact. Over time, pieces of the story began to leak. The letter from JW, the testimony that other family members had concerns, the details from the police that contradicted Daystar's public claims. Each revelation chipped away at the official version of events, and with each crack in the narrative, the cost of keeping quiet grew heavier for those who had chosen not to speak. The price of truth in a setting like this is steep because it demands something that influence can't easily give up: control. Telling the full truth means letting go of the power to shape perception. It means risking that donors will pull their support, viewers will turn away, and reputations will suffer. That's why so many institutions, religious, political, corporate, cling to silence. They convince themselves that protecting the brand is protecting the mission, but in reality, it's often about protecting those in power. For Jonathan and Susie, the decision was clear. They couldn't live with the cost of silence. They walked away from positions, income, and the chance to lead Daystar in the future. They traded influence for integrity, comfort for conviction. And in doing so, they exposed just how much of the system was built on keeping certain truths buried. The deeper tragedy is that this isn't just a Daystar problem, it's a human problem. In any community where influence is currency, the temptation to stay silent is strong, even when the stakes involve the safety of a child. Speaking up threatens the structures that give people security. Staying quiet allows those structures to stand, but at the expense of justice. In the end, silence is rarely neutral. It either shields the truth or it shields the lie. In the Daystar case, the silence of certain insiders, combined with the influence of a powerful ministry, kept the truth from reaching the public for far too long. And the price of that silence wasn't just paid by Jonathan and Susie, it was paid by everyone who deserved to know the full story, and by a little girl whose safety should have been the first priority. The uncomfortable truth is that influence and silence often go hand in hand, and the people who benefit most from that arrangement are usually the ones who have the most to lose if the truth comes out. But as this story shows, the truth has a way of surfacing, even when the cost of speaking it feels unbearable. And when it does, it forces everyone involved to reckon with the same hard question: was protecting influence worth the price?